they started having kids, and this is the interesting part about Grandma Smith and I guess your mom and dad. They had 16 kids.
In 22 years.
16 kids in 22 years. No twins.
No twins.
And they were really, all 16 were alive until last year, 2023.
7 years of good luck. I guess.
Here we go. So, for people in the description, will say it, but you're my dad.
Yep.
Mark Smith. How old are you?
I'll be 70 this year, so I'm 69 and
69 and a little
there.
bit. Yeah. So I thought this would be cool because, like, imagine if you could sit and watch like a video podcast of like your great grandpa. So someday, there will be somebody watching this that's probably one of your in your lineage that never got to meet you. So it's kind of cool, I think.
Yeah.
So let's start back. Let's just kind of go, and a lot of this stuff actually will be good because even, my kids don't know everything, or even I don't, but where were you born?
In Los Animas, Colorado.
Okay. Los Animas, southeast Colorado.
Yep.
What's that area like?
Hot and dry.
Or cold and dry.
It's a good place to be from.
Yeah. Glad to not live there still. What did your parents do?
My dad was a rancher, and Mom obviously raised kids.
Yeah.
and and kept him going.
Yeah. So how did your family? How did like our great grandparents? Who was it that settled there? And do you remember like the year?
My grandfather. He homesteaded it in 1914.
How did he get out there? How did he find that area?
I think he probably did a prior trip to, that was one of the last areas that was still open for settling.
Yeah.
And he probably would have taken a train and obviously horseback to get, I imagine it's 12 miles from possibly where the train would stop to get out and look at the land.
Yeah. Where was he from?
He was from Kansas.
Okay, so, it wasn't
too far.
Yeah. What did his family do in Kansas?
Well, his family actually, I'm not exactly sure what his family did, but I know my grandma's, she came from a very wealthy family.
Yeah.
I don't have that much history. You need to talk to my elder siblings.
Yeah.
To remember exactly what he did. But, those were always large families. And I guess, at some point, just like me, you're going to have to make a decision.
Yeah.
To maybe leave where you're at and go find something else.
Right.
But I don't have all the detailed history of him. I'm sure the sister that took care of all that, it's documented.
So from what I remember, there was a story that he wanted to marry, I guess would have been your grandmother, right? He wanted to marry your grandmother, but he didn't have anything to his name or something, so he had to go basically have something to his name, and then he found that Colorado property and then was able to marry her. Is that right? Do you remember that?
You might know more than me because it sounds like you ask questions of your grandma.
Well, I think I remember Kathy saying that he did. It sounds like he took the train out to that area, settled or found that property, and then went back to Kansas, and then he was allowed to, I guess, marry your grandma or take her away or whatever they did back then.
That's news to me. So
yeah. So what did when they settled that land? Why did they settle that particular spot? Like, do you remember why he?
Well, it would have been some of the last stuff left, and you can imagine what it would have looked like.
Yeah.
Back then in 1914, just all buffalo grass and
prairie.
And it was a ways from civilization, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
probably would have looked at it and thought you could raise thousands of cattle and farm, and I would imagine to the untrained eye.
yeah, and I don't know how many other settlers had already got there, because there was old rock homesteads on every 3 miles you could run into a rock homestead.
Yeah.
And most of them didn't make it.
So what did he originally build there?
Started with a dugout cellar. Wood would have been really hard to come by because there's not any trees nearby.
Yeah.
Your wood would have had to come in on the railroad, and then you'd have had to wagon it out to your home. So a lot of people went underground first, and they were able to quarry rocks from close areas to kind of square them up. And I know the old dugout cellar was lined with rocks.
Was it?
No mortar. It seems like they were kind of dry stacked.
So they just hand dug how big of a room?
I'd be surprised if it was 12 by 16.
Yeah. And how deep do you think they went?
They probably went 5 feet deep and had the cellar out a ways, maybe 3 feet out.
Yeah. So then they built like a wood structure over the top of that?
Yeah. Wood covering.
So they did that. That probably also then they would have been better insulated from the ground than what they had available.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember how, like that part sticking out of the ground, did they have anything insulated, like any kind of form of insulation?
No.
Good God.
If anything, maybe a little dirt thrown up around things.
Yeah.
Because
that area of the country gets brutal cold as well. I mean, it's hot in the summer, but
it does.
That would have been a cold winters in there.
Yeah. So
how many kids did they have? Your mom would have been one of their kids, I guess. How many siblings?
No, Dad was their kid.
Okay.
And he was born on the ranch in a building that they had put up separate from the dugout. At some point they had this.
He was born on the ranch?
Yes, he was born in this building, one of the first buildings they put above ground.
Okay.
He was born in that building.
Yeah.
So the doctors would have come in horseback.
Right.
I think he was the only one out of his siblings. I think he had 6 siblings.
He was the oldest?
No, there was older siblings.
Was there?
And I can't remember all the ages,
Yeah.
Most of the ones I remember were the ones that mostly settled in our region. My other uncle and one that lived in my hometown, Los Animas there.
Yeah.
I think George was the oldest.
Do you remember them when you were growing up coming out to the ranch then, or?
Yeah, they'd come out and visit. Actually, my Uncle George had a little place down what we call the south end of our ranch over the hill. They had built a little homestead shack out of rocks above ground.
Yeah.
And they lived there a while, but they more apt to go into town and live there.
Yeah.
So
how big was the ranch when they originally settled it?
Well, I think it was pretty close to what they had when I grew up. They might have added some sections, but I just don't have all that.
You remember how big it was when you were there then?
Well, roughly 5,000 acres. But there was other homesteads, rock buildings around, and my dad would refer to them as this place or that place, and I didn't retain all that. And
yeah. Yeah. So how did Grandma Smith enter the picture then? If she was, if Grandpa Smith was born there?
Well, she was born in Kansas.
Yeah.
At their homestead is just north of Syracuse, Kansas, which would have been similar country before it was farmed up.
Mm-hmm.
Dry country, hot country, maybe a little more rain, like for farming.
Mm-hmm.
And her dad, they he was homesteaded there, and she was born, I assume, in Syracuse or somewhere nearby.
Yeah.
So,
How did they meet?
well, typically a party of some sort that got my dad together with, because my dad and her, they had a double wedding with two of the other. It was Jimmy and Beulah.
Oh.
There was a double wedding, and somehow they'd go on these double dates, It's kind of what I get from it.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow he met her through maybe Jimmy's wife,
Mm-hmm.
Beulah. Now, I don't know how they got connected from the distance they had apart, but by then, I assume there was, the cars.
Right. They had cars by
They
then.
had cars by then.
Yeah. What do you remember? Do you know at all how old they were when they got together or when they got married?
Well, I would say it was somewhere in 45, because Mike, my oldest brother, was born in 46. And, my dad went off to World War II.
So when he went off to the war, was Mike already born? Or was that just before?
Just before.
So did she have Mike when he was gone?
No, I think he was back. I don't have those years very...
Yeah. Well, you weren't born yet, so...
Yeah. Well, I should know when he went off to the war and when he got back.
Yeah. What was he was in the 10th Mountain Division, right?
Yes.
What was his job?
He was a farrier, shoed mules.
So how long was he, and what country was he in then during the war?
Mostly Italy during the war, in the Alps.
Do you know how long he was over there?
I don't exactly.
Yeah.
I'm thinking a couple years or something. But
yeah. I wonder if they had Mike. I wonder if he went over to the war before. So before, if they had Mike after he came home, or
I think that's how it worked out.
Yeah.
I
wonder what those. There's some pictures of him in the war over there in Italy, and like a bunch of snow. It had to have been miserable conditions.
Right. He hated the cold.
Was he actually fairly close to any of the combat? Was he in the combat? Do you know?
It's something he never talked about.
Yeah.
The only thing I remember is him talking about always being so cold.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they didn't have the gear we have today to stay warm. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So they started having kids, and this is the interesting part about Grandma Smith, and I guess your mom and dad. They had 16 kids
in 22 years.
16 kids in 22 years. No twins.
No twins.
And they were really, all 16 were alive until last year, 2023.
It's 7 years of good luck.
Unbelievable.
It is.
20, you said in 22 years they had 16 kids?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't even seem like it's possible.
No.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. That they cranked them out. So they obviously were, I mean, part of it was, I guess there's nothing much to do out there, but they were Catholic too, right? Your mom was pretty strong Catholic.
Definitely.
So Catholic beliefs and a ranch in the middle of nowhere. I guess you make a lot of kids. What's the mix of boys and girls?
5 boys and 11 girls.
And you're right in the middle?
Number 7.
Yeah. So what was that like growing up with 15 brothers and sisters?
You'd try and hide a lot. Good and bad.
Yeah.
Good times were things we did on the ranch for fun, mostly just on Sundays.
Yeah.
Bad times was fighting over chores.
Yeah.
Seems like I was closest to, like, my sister Margaret, which should have been born right after me.
Mm-hmm.
I was probably a little closer to my brother Jeff, which was born right after me, and the youngest boy. But, of course, we fought over things.
Yeah. Well, and you had, I would imagine being in the middle, you had older ones picking on you and younger ones you had to take care of.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. One of my favorite sisters actually was one of the only girls in the family that worked. My dad contracted out building fence, and she was part of the boys' team.
Who was that?
Kathy.
Yeah.
When we lost last summer.
Yeah.
And she was kind of my favorite at that time because big sister could tell me things,
Yeah. Yeah. So where did you guys go to school then? Was there schoolhouse out there?
It started out, Woodrow School was about 2 miles from our ranch.
Mm-hmm.
And the neighborhood would have involved my cousins, which were probably 2 miles straight north. There was kids in that family. Our other neighbors a mile from our place were just other people, the Fultons. And I think there might have been some Dawsies from the west, maybe a couple miles from the school, that might have been there a little bit. Mm-hmm. So there's 3 families that had kids, 4, including our family.
Mm-hmm.
And I only did 2 years there, so...
When you were just little?
Yes, and I didn't want to go to school because, of course, we all got a chance to help Dad do things. We drove by the time we were even going to school.
Yeah.
We'd let the pickup idle while he fed cows, and I just wanted to stay home and do that. And
right.
never go to school, so
yeah.
I didn't take it too well when I went off to school there. And it was a 1-room country school. In the summer, we would walk home. In the spring and fall, nice weather, we'd walk that 3 miles.
Yeah.
With the neighbors and the cousins. Cousins were probably only a mile from the school.
Yeah.
And when bad weather came, we'd catch rides home with our aunt or, they'd take turns shuttling kids.
Right. Right. Was it like a Catholic 1-room school, like nun deal, or what was the...
It was not Catholic. It was just a 1-room, They hired a teacher to come out, every day. And
yeah. So then where'd you go to school after that 2 years?
Well, we got bused into Los Animas.
Okay.
Which was 17 miles. And that was a 1-hour bus trip with our cousins and the neighbor, the Fultons.
Yeah. An hour each way?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what age were you when you started going to school in town?
Well, I would assume 7 or 8.
Yeah. I remember you telling stories about or maybe it was your my aunts or uncles telling stories about the 1-room schoolhouse, how much they hated the teacher.
Yeah, the first teacher we had was just, I always thought she was a really old lady, but she must have been pretty young.
Yeah.
But they would do things to her that would pretty much aggravate her, so we probably had it coming. I can't say that I would have been that bad a kid at 1st and 2nd grade. But,
yeah.
Of course, you would have probably laughed along with the adults if they were pulling things on the teacher. So
yeah.
But
yeah.
The next year we had a couple that taught us, a man and wife, and I think we went out to a little teacherage, or the younger kids were in a little separate building.
Mm-hmm.
And that was okay.
Yeah. So when you went to school in town, did you end up ever doing any sports or involved in anything outside of just school?
No. I only remember a brother taking part in football, and he broke an ankle right off the bat. And I think that put a damper on anybody else doing sports.
Really?
Not to mention, we had one family car and a pickup on the ranch. Mm-hmm. And can you imagine shuttling kids back and forth down a rough 17 miles of country roads?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think that was ever a real option to do that,
Yeah. What do you remember about like after After school and stuff, did you come home and then work on the ranch?
Oh, yeah.
What kind of stuff did you do around the ranch?
Everything from we did a little farming, not a lot. There's always chores with cattle, feeding if it's in the fall and summer, or spring and fall. Always fence maintenance. I did a lot. My dad taught us a lot. I mean, from mechanicking to just keeping tractors going, or just anything involved with, doctoring cattle when you had to, moving them all the time. Always had chores. We milked cows. We had 2 to 3 milk cows with that many kids.
Yeah.
Chores morning and night. Then I guess your homework during the school year.
What do you remember about life around the house with 15 siblings?
Good and bad. It's just, when you think about we started out, there was only one bathroom in the house until I'm thinking I got maybe 12, 13 years old maybe before we added onto the house and got a second bathroom. So we did have an outhouse. So, if we ended up fighting, it would kind of get kicked out the door or get in trouble. But seems like there was, at first when we didn't have the added addition, there was you walked through a living room and went to 2 back rooms. Well, the boys' room was through the first door, and you kept going, and this was an add-on at some point before I was even, born probably. Go through the next door, and it was a girl's room. So occasionally the door would get thrown open, and there'd be pillow fights, those kinds of things.
You guys didn't have a heck of a lot of water, right? Did you have running water?
We had we had a windmill that when it was windy, it would fill this cistern, which is another maintenance thing we had to keep cleaned out once in a while. It would pump the water into the cistern, and then we had a booster pump under the house. We had a basement under the house. So we had water. I think we probably had better water pressure during those days until my dad abandoned that, and we ran a pipeline from like 2 miles south of our homestead.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So, but I remember you guys still had to be pretty conservative with water around the house, didn't you, as far as baths and showers or whatever?
Well, we shared showers. The shower was the first thing we had. And when you were a really little kid, I can remember taking baths in a wash tub.
Really?
Like maybe up until you're, a couple of years old.
Yeah.
And then you share a shower with 2 brothers.
Yeah.
Well, there was not very good memories on some of that. So.
Remember, or I imagine lots of fights in the shower probably too.
Yeah, and then eventually when we added on for the so-called boys' room, they did a bathroom downstairs with a tub, and I can remember taking a bath with one other brother in the tub.
Did you get...
And we didn't do this every day. It was kind of like once a week.
Bath once a week? Yeah. What do you remember about like what the girls did around the ranch? Because like you guys were out. Sounds like the boys were out helping your dad.
Yeah.
What were the girls mostly doing?
Household things, from laundry to, anything.
Did you guys have a garden?
We did. Yeah. We had a fairly large garden at times. And my dad had that. The big one was quite a ways south of the ranch. We had a pretty good-sized irrigation pump, but it seemed like a lot of that was kind of a failure a bit. The gardening didn't, with the kind of weather we had, it could be okay, a lot of work.
Speaking of work, I would imagine with that many kids, I can't imagine the amount of laundry your mom did. And she didn't have a washer and dryer, did she?
No, not at first. She had an old Ringer washer. That would have been the earliest, And I can remember, they had a wringer on them that wring the water out of the clothing. And then she'd just hang them to dry, which in that country you could do that year round.
Yeah.
It happened pretty fast.
Yeah. What do you remember from those days about your mom?
Just always had her hands full.
Yeah.
Just didn't seem like ever any time off. And, having that many girls were a big help at some point, but it seems like she was always, if you think about how many years she was actually pregnant.
Yeah, like all the time. Yeah. What do you remember about your dad back in those days?
Well, he was a very good manager, and he knew how to do a lot of things. You got to remember that when he came back from the war, he wasn't the same as when he left. So, but he was a good father, taught us all a lot. He did have a couple horses, and he could shoe his own horses, but he never really, I can't even remember that I saw him ride much, when I was growing up. But some of the other kids like to do that. Always out maintaining things on the ranch. Watching over his cattle, just really focused on the ranch. And
was he a pretty good dad, or was he rough, or was he quiet or loud, or what was he like?
He was a good dad. You just got to recall that when he's drinking, that things can kind of change in that way. You know, it got at times really frustrating as I got older, and I could see, and I didn't understand at the time, had no idea why,
Right.
And
probably had some form of like PTSD or something that no one knew about back then.
They didn't know what it was, and and he couldn't talk about a lot of what he actually witnessed. My wife had learned some things that from other parts of the family that, we had no idea. I didn't know that, He'd go off to town occasionally and hit the bars, and maybe get in a little trouble there, but nothing serious. He was a strong person.
Yeah.
But no, when he was not sober, he did a good job on the ranch.
Yeah. He worked, you boys worked awful hard though, right?
Yeah.
You guys worked probably harder than most people can imagine these days.
Well, you can imagine, it seems like my early days growing up, you're out stacking. Our hay bales were actually kind of a form of maize, if you know what maize looks like. We called it sugar cane. And when it grew tall and he baled it up, it was baling wire, and they weighed about 80 pounds. And we did a lot of that. He would bale it in the field, and then we had a farmhand, and we'd have to go stack it out of the field into a stack, and then end up moving it home, and then feeding it. So
you moved it about
we moved
three
it
times.
and moved it.
Yeah.
And that's how I got into a lot of really, one of my brothers, we fought over. My dad would say, "All right, Richard, this is my older brother." He'd say, "You go out there and you and Mark go stack that hay over there. And you run the farmhand, Mark. you're the youngest, you feed Richard. Well, we'd get out to the field. Yeah, he'd put me on the farmhand, but he would get on the farmhand when the bales were really close to where we're stacking.
Yeah.
And he'd just dump them on me and dump them on. And then when they got way out there, he'd put me on the farmhand.
Yeah.
You know, I can remember one haystack that I made it look good on the outside of the stack because the bales were breaking. I couldn't keep up.
Yeah.
You know, so I just kind of made it pretty on the outside.
Yeah.
Oh boy, did we catch hell when
he fed
when
to the
he
middle
dug
of that.
into that stack and we were feeding cattle out of it. He's like, "What in the heck?"
Yeah. Huh. And you guys did lots and lots of fencing, right?
Yeah,
Digging lots of fence post holes.
Yeah, we had a little tractor with an auger, bitty John Deere, which helped do that. But you usually had to go along with post hole diggers and clean them out. Mm-hmm. And they were a cedar post we put in the ground, and we had to tamp those in, every one of them.
Yeah.
You know, that was another one of my jobs. You know, we did 15 miles one summer.
Yeah.
Contracted out for neighbors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How old were you then?
I was young.
Yeah.
Because my first job was following the pickup, and it rolled off like three barbed wires came off the back of the rolls. And my job was to keep them lined up. Like as he drove down with the pickup, I would grab them and pull on them and straighten them out real nice and straight, like 2 feet apart.
Yeah.
Maybe 5 feet from the fence. That was my first job, you know, and then of course tamping posts and
Yeah.
stapling the wires up. But
Yeah.
you know, he did a really good job, and it only had to be 3-wire, you know,
Yeah.
for that country.
You guys didn't, I mean, with all the kids, you know, still being alive until last year, you guys didn't have much for tragedy back then, or, I mean, you guys.
Nothing serious. The older brother we lost here recently, he got in a couple pretty serious accidents before he was out of high school.
Really?
One for sure right before he got out of high school on a motorcycle. And he was actually broke up pretty bad. He hit a car doing a U-turn. They didn't see him. They were coming over an overpass, and he had a friend on behind him with a big Harley, and they were probably going too fast. Mm-hmm. And a guy did a U-turn in front of him, and it threw the guy behind him over the top of the car and busted my brother up where he was in bed for months in traction.
Yeah.
Broken leg and all messed up.
Yeah.
But good time for some of us brothers to get even with him.
Yeah. So, I mean, what was high school like? Like, because you guys were also worked hard, but you were pretty wild with pickups and chasing coyotes. And what was some of those stories?
Well, we grew up, part of our having fun would be the Sunday off when we got older, and we could, you know, being ranchers, you didn't want too many coyotes around, so we'd take off and go around the whole neighborhood to quite a few miles south and east and west, and we knew the country really well and could really wreck some really nice cars in the process. I feel bad about all that now because some of those things are worth a small fortune.
Yeah, you guys, there's, you know, your brother still runs the ranch down there, and there's a boneyard down there with cars, old pickups and cars in it, and there's probably $2 million worth of cars if they were all sitting there on the lot brand new today.
Yeah, for sure.
What were some of the old models that you liked because you guys would buy them, right? Like buy them and fix them up and then run them around?
Yeah, you could buy.
I mean, you weren't buying brand new cars.
No. I worked at a Ford dealer, so I could buy cars that came right off from the customer, and sometimes $100, you know.
Really?
57 Buick Roadmaster, all chrome, $100, $150.
Yeah.
52 Ford F 250, $150.
Really?
And my other brothers were, they were into the demo derbies. I didn't do that, but they had fun doing that, fix them up and wreck them out in the demo derbies. And,
yeah. What you said you worked at the Ford dealership? What'd you do there?
Mechanicing.
Okay.
My last 2 years in high school, I went to a school in La Junta, which was about 20 miles west of Los Animas.
Why'd you go there?
Vocational school in mechanic.
Oh.
I thought I wanted to be a mechanic.
Yeah.
When I grew up.
Yeah.
And I wished I'd have never done that, because I'd probably just be hiring people to do my mechanical work today.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was high school, but it was more of a vocational school.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense.
That was fun. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Yeah. Learned a lot of skills, obviously, that you used forever. So, at what point did you meet Mom then? Because that was during high school, wasn't it?
I met your mom, actually, a ranch about 8 miles from our place, a huge ranch. Their dad came down with the family and to manage that when they moved down to Los Animas. He had the job managing this, I think it was 80,000 acres.
So my grandpa on Mom's side was managing that ranch? Papa?
No. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Papa was managing the ranch.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow, we built fence for that big ranch. And, of course, when he took over it, we really liked him. He was a cool guy, and he liked our work. And he had 2 boys and my wife, Lisa, now.
Mm-hmm.
And we became really good friends with Mike and Tim.
Yeah, my uncles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they'd come over once in a while, or we'd go to the ugly swimming hole on the creek together sometimes. And we'd go duck hunting with her dad, and he was just a real character. He had like the big old Lincoln Continentals, and those dirt roads, he'd run them down the road like 70 mile an hour.
Yeah.
Jump out at the stock ponds, and they had a wiener dog, and he was the retriever. So we had a lot of fun with him, because he just had such a great sense of humor, and it's fun to watch him, and throw the wiener dog out there to try and retrieve the duck, and not a chance, but he'd just swim back. And
that's funny.
So that's initially how I knew her, but they ended up moving away, and we had no idea what happened. They just disappeared.
Oh, really?
They were gone. And I don't think we heard back for maybe a couple years or something. And Lisa started writing letters to my next closest younger sister, Margaret.
Oh, really?
And they kind of stayed in contact a little bit. We kind of found out what happened. The family divorced, and they ended up in Florida, eventually California. But
yeah. So you didn't know they were leaving. They were just gone.
No, they were just gone.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. And was, I wonder where Papa went then. 'Cause if Mom went with her mom,
he, I think, went to Wyoming. He kind of bounced around when he left. I don't know exactly where all he went. I know at one time he was in Rifle, Colorado, and then Wheatland, Wyoming.
Yeah.
And other places, I think.
Yeah.
But they lived in Florida a while, and eventually moved to California. And eventually the boys ended up in Wheatland with their dad.
Mm-hmm.
And she was in California with her mom and stepdad.
Right. So the other thing that was kind of happening, like around the time you were graduating school, your older brothers were a fair amount older. They started flying, right?
Yeah.
Flying planes.
Mike started when I think he was like 15 or 16 right there locally in Los Animas.
Mm-hmm.
I just finally heard about this story after he passed, that he was just always looking up to the sky, even at the ranch. I didn't know. All I knew is he was crazy about these little hand-line, little gas airplanes, and he just loved messing with them. but he just always watching the planes, and he says, someday I'm going to fly.
Mm-hmm.
So he was hanging around the airport when he was young and watching everybody, and pretty soon he started asking questions of the people that were flying there, and this guy took him under his wing, and he started getting training.
Mm-hmm.
And, they were flying a little Super Cub or something, and heck, he only made like, I don't know, 4 or 5 flights with this so-called instructor. He wasn't officially an instructor, but
yeah,
back then. And the guy says, hey, you're ready for your license. And he says, well, could I trade out working for you to help pay for some of the, the cost of doing the plane? Oh, sure. And he started spraying crops at that point.
Really?
Yeah, early.
So he was spraying, doing the crop dusting stuff, and then you ended up, did you work for him in high school or after high school?
It was after high school.
Yeah.
That was the year after we got married.
Okay.
Like 76 or 77. We had a really bad experience on the ranch. My dad really wanted us to stay there. And after I went with my other brother, John, weed harvest 5 years in a row. And then like the 5th year we were married. And that fall we came home and stayed on the ranch. Mm-hmm. And we thought, well, we were in my grandpa's place, which was only 2 miles or a mile and a half from our home place. And we walked there a lot too, to my grandpa's,
mm-hmm.
Back in the day. We had nice days, we'd walk over there and see him.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we were living there, and we had this wind event come in I think it was the spring of 76 or 77. And it was a record-breaking 100-mile-an-hour plus wind, nonstop, 3 days in a row. And at that time, I was working for an uncle in excavation,
mm-hmm.
and I had been up towards La Junta, 30 miles from the ranch that day. And when I came back, I came down the concrete or the paved road, and then I got ready to turn and head to the ranch, which was about a 12-mile road east and west. And when I turned, here's tumbleweeds 10 feet high in the middle from fence to fence.
Yeah.
All collected, and I had no idea I've never witnessed this. I'm like, and the wind was just blowing so bad, I knew I needed to get home. So I just gunned it through there. I'm surprised I didn't start a fire or something, but I managed to blast out of the tumbleweeds and got to the ranch, and my lovely wife's laying in a bathtub with water, with the washcloth over her face. And it's like the dust was sifting out of this house from the wind from the 30s. That dust collected in the walls in the attic. Mm-hmm. And they've never had that kind of wind, so it was just literally a dust storm in the house.
Yeah.
So that was the spring, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I don't think this is going to work.
Yeah. Well, so before we get kind of to there, so when you graduated high school, did you just go on weed harvest then? Or is
I started the weed harvest my sophomore year.
Oh.
Spring, summer, do that with my brother. And I did that 5 years.
Okay.
So,
and where did you do weed? Where did you go? Was it just around local?
We'd go to Oklahoma, where my combining brother was in this Johnson, Kansas area, was his home base. So we'd go to Olustee, Oklahoma, and we'd cut wheat, clear to Winifred, Montana, as it ripened.
You did that every year?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
5 years. Just helping him out in the summer, and then I'd help Dad,
Well, that had to have been pretty cool, seeing that much country, because, you probably didn't travel too much as a kid.
It was, yeah.
Did you enjoy weed harvest?
I did. We had a lot of fun with some of my, my good friends got on board too, some of them.
Mm-hmm.
my brother-in-law, Mike Robertson, he had joined us.
Mm-hmm.
Another brother-in-law was with us, and we just had party after party. And
yeah,
I don't know how we survived those years, honestly.
yeah. You guys climbed towers, didn't you? Tell us stories about that.
Well, I had a brother-in-law that was crazy about that, and he would, in his off time, he'd just go climb a water tower.
Mm-hmm.
Or back then they were just a big tower with, it wasn't like the towers we have now, but antennas on them. You'd
Mm-hmm.
climb those.
Like a radio tower.
Yeah.
Change the light in them.
Well, he would just take the lights off of them just for fun.
Yeah.
But he, when you're partying, you're young, you do really stupid stuff,
Yeah.
I had my share of that, and I got over it by the time you were born.
Yeah. And so you actually got to, that was kind of the first time you had seen Montana then, would have been back then, huh?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Which you never saw this side of the state. You would have just seen eastern Montana.
Right.
Yeah. So how did mom end up back there and you guys connected?
Well, it was a wheat harvest year, and she had wrote a letter to Margaret and said she's going to come visit.
Mm-hmm.
And it just turned out we were on harvest, and Margaret was a truck driver,
Mm-hmm.
my next youngest sister. So she came, and of course, when I look back to when we were kids and I was messing with her brothers, I had a little crush on her, but she never knew that.
Yeah.
I always thought she was a pretty cool, she rode horses a lot on the ranch. That was her love, was horses.
Yeah.
And I could just see her on horses. We'd go over there and help them do things at their ranch, and she'd be out riding horses.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, cute kid,
Yeah. Yeah.
But never said anything, and then off they're gone. And
Mm-hmm.
so when she came to visit wheat harvest, wow, we got kind of hooked up during that time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. So what year did you guys get married?
1975.
Okay. So how did you end up, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, you were doing some excavation work, like when you were first married there. When did the first, because, for people that don't know, closing all the way out to, to present day, you ended up with an excavation company for the last 40 years. But how did the whole excavation thing come along?
We started out helping my uncle, which was the one just 2 miles north of us, Uncle Bob. And he was kind of a drinking man too, but he just enjoyed going in and socializing at the bars. And
Mm-hmm.
and he needed a little help now and then. And we started I just helped him on like well work, pulling deep wells up and replacing the leathers in the device in the bottom where they'd pump water. And I helped him do that quite a few years, and he had the excavation equipment to do trenching, and it kind of started out on our own ranch. I ran the trencher for him, and we ran water all the way from a well south of the house clear across the ranch way up, and I did a good job, so I got hired helping him do things. And
Yeah.
one thing led to another, and I went from the trencher to a backhoe. And when I got on that, Lisa remembers, so I came home and I said, God, I'll never be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And eventually he could count on me going out. He went out on these big ranches, and you'd be pipelining for a week,
Yeah.
laying it 2 or 3 feet deep, and where you needed a backhoe, you'd do some digging, and he could just turn me loose.
Mm-hmm.
And I was out there all by myself sometimes doing all that, and
Mm-hmm.
he'd be back at the bar lining up the next job,
Yeah.
So it worked out pretty good.
So when you decided to leave the ranch, like when the dusty storm happened and you guys were over the ranch, what was the next move? Where do you go, and how do you decide to leave?
Well, we went to my oldest brother, Mike. By that time, he had quite a crop spraying business in Johnson, Kansas. Had 3 ag cats,
Mm-hmm.
and he needed a hand to just flag for him with the pickup.
What's that mean?
Well, you jump in a pickup, and these three ag cats take off crack of dawn, daylight, and you're just running all the time with a flag on the back of your pickup. They didn't have the devices they have now, but you just go from field to field, and you had a way to test how far you moved ahead as they came down and put their chemical out.
So they were just lining up off of you.
Yep, that's all I was an alignment. And you run wide open from field to field in a brand new 4-wheel drive Chevy, fast as it'd go.
Yeah.
To keep up with them.
Yeah.
And I did that all summer. And meanwhile, we got the opportunity to fly on our own. We both soloed, and we just kind of did some trading. He offered that to us in our free time, free training.
So did you end up with your pilot's license?
No.
Just flew?
We both just soloed, Lisa and I.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a bonus,
Mm-hmm.
And, we spent that whole summer helping him.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, he had a Warbird 1 or 2, P-51 Mustang,
Mm-hmm.
and a P-63 King Cobra. That's another whole long story, but it was pretty cool because, every now and then he'd fly those things, and they're just beautiful. And
did you ever go up in it?
We both got the opportunity to go up with him in the P-51.
Yeah.
He was just training for air shows, and just the experience I'll never forget.
Yeah. That's cool. And, he raced airplanes. He had the fastest, V-tail Bonanza in the world?
Yeah, stock V-tail Bonanza.
Mm-hmm. Tell them about the story about the Eiffel Tower.
Well, they have to Google that. This ex-Vietnam vet I think he was the youngest pilot. I'd have to look that up again and read it, but I think he was the youngest pilot in Vietnam. Mm. And I don't know, somehow he found out about Mike. And at that time, Mike had this fastest Bonanza, and the guy was kind of wanting to do a race over, I can't remember exactly where that was, but
over in France.
Yeah, and anyway, he contacted Mike. I wished I had it word for word how Mike did that, but he had quite a bit of compassion for these vets, and especially having a dad for a vet.
Mm-hmm.
He says this guy would like to use his plane to get in this race. And Mike says, oh, no doubt. Now darn right, you can take that plane and get in this race. And anyway, I don't think he won the race, but he had this all planned in the beginning to fly under the Eiffel Tower. So he had all the contacts to have people filming on the ground, and he pulled that off with a huge amount of people under the tower. And you can Google that. I don't have the name off the top of my head.
There's old pictures. If you just Google
Yeah.
Plane through the Eiffel Tower, and you'll see old photos of that plane flying through the tower. Because they ended up hanging cables or something through there, so you can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
But of course, Uncle Mike didn't know, but he got some phone calls from whether it was the FAA or whatever. But
yeah, he was spraying crops, and he got a phone call and said something about, your plane was just went under the Eiffel Tower,
Yeah.
He had no idea,
Yeah. So you worked for Uncle Mike, and then where'd you guys go from there?
We moved to Colorado Springs.
Why Colorado Springs?
Well, I wanted to do more in excavation. I wanted to kind of get more skills.
Mm-hmm.
And we had, it would have been cool to think that you could own your own backhoe someday. So we became a friend we moved to Colorado Springs. I got a job there pretty easy. I was pretty inexperienced when it came down to working in a city,
Yeah.
digging holes. But this gas company hired me, and they just so happened to have one of the best backhoe operators probably in the whole country.
Really?
And they had 3 backhoes, and he was an older guy, and I ended up working in the ditches behind him, watching him do the digging and exposing wires and everything else. And he was really good, and he taught me a lot. The other guys hated him because he just was the best,
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from him.
Mm-hmm.
But we had bought a house there in Colorado Springs, and I got to meet a really good salesman that became a really good friend. He actually came clear out to the ranch to visit us once, because somehow we had made contact with him about backhoes, and he came all the way from Colorado Springs to
Sell you a backhoe?
Well, he thought he could.
Yeah.
We didn't have $1 to our name. He figured that out right away, but
Yeah.
he became a really good friend, and eventually we got our wishes there,
When you and Mom got married, where did you get married?
in San Diego.
Okay, why in San Diego?
Well, it's kind of where her stepdad was, her mom and stepdad.
Yeah.
It just seems like that it's their daughter.
Right.
You want to marry the daughter, you're going to come to San Diego.
Yeah. Well, and also it's probably a little nicer weather to get married out there than in Los Animas, maybe. But
Yeah, it was early April.
Yeah. Yeah.
It could be bad weather in Los Animas. But
What did you have when you got married? What'd you get for your wedding?
The big thing was a brand new Fiat.
Yeah.
Her stepdad bought us a brand new car. He did that for his other siblings.
Okay.
I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
She had a choice of a Volkswagen Rabbit or a Fiat.
Really?
And he was sort of leaning to the Fiat, And so
Yeah.
one of the other kids got a Volkswagen.
Really?
Eventually, we kind of wished we'd have got the Volkswagen.
Yeah. What else did you have when you got married? Like what was your financial position and stuff?
I might add a couple $100 to my name or something. I had some cows. I had a dozen cows.
Yeah.
On the ranch, and trying to build my herd a little bit, whatever that was worth at the time, but didn't have much to my name. I had bought a brand new pickup in 1975 at the Ford dealer I worked at. I ordered it, just so you know, in 1975, it was like $6,500.
Was it?
For a 2-wheel drive Ranger XLT. But yeah, I had that, and I had debt on it.
Yeah.
But
strapped down to payments.
My dad started us out early, going to the bank.
Really?
Yeah. So he'd take us out. We borrowed our own money for whatever we needed. He'd walk us into and I'd just like shaking in my shoes.
Yeah.
To borrow money.
Yeah.
I hated that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was necessary.
Right. So you guys ended up in Colorado. And so at what point did you leave the gas company or get your own backhoe or decide to do something different?
Well, I had a job offer from another outfit that had a lot of big loaders. They had a couple backhoes. It was a better job offer, and in the union.
How much an hour were you making back then?
Maybe $12 or something, maybe. I don't really remember. It couldn't have been all that much. Of course, rent would have been a lot cheaper. Our first house was $12,000, so a little fixer-upper, And anyway, yeah, they hired me, and what was cool is I got to run the big loaders from 950s to 980s, and they had a sign right on their equipment doors. You had to fine grade within an inch. That was the requirement. And they did a lot of flat work. a lot of backfill work in houses, commercial buildings, footings for commercial buildings. So I could do it all. I could run the backhoe, and I was way better at the backhoe than the old senior guy they had. There was two of us, and got to where the superintendents would request, Mark, get him out here. Leave that dangerous old guy back at the office.
Yeah.
Anyway, and the loaders, we got good at grading within an inch with a big loader in a fairly tight garage, backfill in the garage. Got to run earth moving scraper for a while, which was really rough work.
Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't continue that.
Yeah.
But I think we did that a couple of years. We were in the Springs 4 years.
Okay.
And I got a really good education on digging around utilities.
Right.
It just reminded me of the guy that trained me. I became kind of like him in what I could do. And
yeah.
And eventually I went to work for just a guy that just owned a backhoe, a truck to pull it with. And he was a real character, fun guy to work for, gave me more money per hour.
Yeah.
And eventually he wanted out of what he was doing, and he had a lease on a fairly new backhoe. And we were able to take that lease over.
Okay.
And I had my own pickup, but I got the trailer and the backhoe and like a compactor jackhammer thing that came on the hoe.
Yeah.
What
kind of a backhoe was it?
It was a Case.
Case what?
580.
Yeah. What would that have been back then?
Would have been a 2-wheel drive.
Yeah.
They didn't have 4-wheel drive yet.
No cab?
No, we didn't need cabs.
Yeah.
There.
So how did you pull it around with your pickup?
I pulled it around with that 2-wheel drive pickup.
Oh, really?
It had a big engine in it, but I got on hills where it completely stalled out.
Really?
Yeah, and I had to figure out how to set the brake and
unload the backhoe.
Yeah,
really?
Had some real experience things there that I didn't.
Yeah. So what prompted you to leave Colorado Springs then?
At this time, Lisa's dad had carved a ranch out of a place in British Columbia. They had something real similar to our Homestead Act.
Yeah.
Way back. He had been there a few years, and he and his wife had carved a ranch out of the forest. And he also was kind of in the dirt business on the side. And basically, this was the early 80s, and, things were going pretty good until like the early 80s.
Yeah.
Right after we got moved up there. But we went up one winter and checked everything out. And then basically he had a backhoe, and he worked for it would be like working for our county. He'd get contract work for them. So he wanted us to become partners. And by this time, 2 little ranch kids are sick and tired of Colorado Springs, the stoplights, the crime, everything else. We had enough.
Yeah.
So young and kind of ignorant, we said, yeah, we'll come.
Yeah.
But we needed to get some legal papers to do it, But we just kind of went off the deep end. Your mom tells me you were 4 or 5 days old when we headed north.
Yeah, so I was born, and then you didn't take your backhoe up there? Did you sell it?
I sold it.
Did you?
I can't remember what all the details of that, but somehow I managed to get rid of it.
Yeah. And then you went up to Canada right after I was born, ahead of Mom, didn't you?
I did. I was up there earlier. She was working on trying to get the papers in order.
Yeah. You should have just had me in Canada, and then I could have been dual citizen.
I think we thought about that for about 2 seconds,
Yeah. That would have been handy. I could I could moose and sheep hunt up there as a resident right now.
Well, she came up. She came up that summer. We were there.
Right.
You know, by this time, I think we had gotten our papers by the time we decided we had to come back.
Yeah.
We spent that summer up there with you. And
you built a cabin up there, right?
I did, yeah. I had spent a summer there before you were born, you know, and yeah, I was working on a cabin right there on the ranch. Just I kind of wanted to learn how to build one, and they had everything I needed to work with it. And it was just a little one.
It's pretty cool though, because like I was up there last year, and that little cabin's still there. It's still in good shape.
Yeah,
it's a cool little log cabin.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be kind of embarrassed to look at it now compared to the one I built in Lincoln.
Well,
you know, I made my own scribe out of like a rake tooth that you'd use for raking hay.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't accurate.
How did you know how to scribe logs or build a cabin back then?
Reading books.
Really?
Yeah, just having this desire to do it.
Yeah. You know. So you guys moved up there with me, and you worked up there for a summer, right? And you moved up there, didn't you move up there with Margaret as well, my aunt?
We all went together, my brother-in-law and sister and Lisa and I.
How how'd that conversation go? Like, hey, do you guys want to move to northern Canada?
Kinda, yeah. They were living in Helena.
Oh, they were? Time.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. How did Margaret end up in Helena? Or how did Earl?
Well, Earl, he eventually got a job there at that, right there in East Helena, where they had all the...
I don't know.
Trying to think of the name of it. But he got a job there. You know, he had been lugging beef in Colorado, which is kind of tough to do. He's a big guy. But he ended up in East Helena working there.
Okay.
And I think one of those years before when I went to Canada, I blew an engine up leaving Helena on the North Hill. And he helped me change. That would have been the year Mount St. Helens blew up. Because we changed an engine out in his backyard in East Helena with ash falling out of the sky.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was a good mechanic, too.
Yeah.
He still lives in Lincoln, too. So.
Yeah. So you guys all moved up to Canada, and that was 1981. And what happened up there?
Well, they were there earlier than us, so they just got they had jobs working, and I don't know. It just, you got to remember that in those times, interest rates went to 22%. Inflation was horrible. You hear about that nowadays all the time. That was the last biggie. Well, when we got there, you can kind of guess that we're the Yankees, and we spent the summer there, but are we really going to keep our jobs in these times?
Yeah.
You know, are they going to hire the Yankees to go run the backhoes and, you know?
Yeah.
And we're just like, you know, this, even her dad said, you know, we thought with you only being 6 months old, and, you know, when we started looking at property a couple years prior to moving up there, a good example is 160 acres with hay ground, a nice little house, a barn, $30,000, $35,000 for the whole thing.
Yeah.
When we hit there and we were getting closer to legal, it was $80,000.
Oh, really?
Just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was out of our reach.
Right.
And we loved a little town. We wanted to move to a little town. Smithers is the name, BC. Mm-hmm. Just a cute little town, you know. But I know it would have been tough if we had stayed there.
Yeah.
So Lisa and I decided we're going to go back. We can't stay here with a young baby and, you know,
yeah,
put food on the table or can't buy anything.
Right.
So Margaret and Earl goes, well, we're going to come back with you.
Really?
And we didn't know where to go. I didn't want to go back to Colorado, and Lisa either. And I was thinking of Wyoming somewhere, maybe closer to my family. Lisa had family in Montana.
Yeah.
So she was leaning towards Montana. And so we all got out in this little cabin. We laid a Montana map out on the floor, and we were just pitching pennies on it. Like, let's pitch pennies on the map, see where.
Yeah.
Just for fun, you know. And I remember one of mine landed on the Klein-Smith Flats, was within 30 miles of where we live today.
Ovando.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we when we got to looking at that Klein-Smith Flats, we were asking Earl and Margaret, well, what's that country like, you know? And Earl knew pretty well, being a hunting guy. He said it's beautiful country, and we were asking because
kind of similar to that Smithers area.
Yeah, being from Helena, we were asking about Lincoln, and he's like, "Oh, it's gorgeous. It's just like a park, you know."
Yeah.
When we came down, when we reached Montana, your mom said, "I like whitefish, Kalispell."
Yeah.
You know, it's like this looks like it'd work for me.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a lot of traffic in there, and it's busy, and
yeah.
I guess I said, we don't need gas. Let's just keep going.
Did you have when you guys moved down here together, were you following each other? Earl
yeah.
What did you all have?
It was scary because they had
pull that mic a little closer.
They had a Ford pickup, and I think they were towing or driving a 58 Ford car with a canoe on top. We were pulling the little 19-foot camper trailer, had our deep freeze in the back, a couple Honda 90s. We must have been quite the sight to see.
A couple motorcycles and a deep freezer?
Yeah, we had a freezer full of beef.
Really?
Yeah, it's one bonus we got from her dad on the ranch.
Yeah.
So we were aiming for Ovando, where the penny landed, like it's really going to be this perfect spot.
Yeah.
We get to Ovando, and there's no place to plug in freezers. This is like later October.
Mm-hmm.
No place to plug in a freezer, and it was dark. Couldn't really see the country that well. So they were saying, "Oh, there's a nice RV park up at the 7-Up Ranch in Lincoln." So we just went on down the road 30 miles to Lincoln and had a nice little park to pull the camper in and hook up, and had an open bar, you know. So we went over and had our first beer back in the States.
Yeah.
Just discussing. It was a beautiful place, 7-Up Ranch Supper Club.
Yeah.
So pretty negative folks, though, in that area, too, about newcomers.
Yeah.
Wasn't the greatest welcoming.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what'd you guys do?
Well, that night, the temperature dipped down to maybe 10 degrees or something, and our camper trailer froze up. They were in a tent.
Earl and Margaret were?
They were in a tent. Yeah.
Oh, my God.
So fortunately, our heater was working, and I think we just, we were blown away with how beautiful it was. So we go into the town of Lincoln and looking around, and it's like, wow, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's so different now, but and I made a comment too. I would move anywhere the wind doesn't blow.
Yeah.
And it did not blow in Lincoln.
Yeah.
Those years. And we were there for a couple of days and decided, you can't just, we started looking at some property and stuff, and we're like, we can't just make this a decision without looking a little more. And I think your mom decided that it'd be kind of cool to go down around Ennis and look around.
Mm-hmm.
So we made that trip down to Ennis, and I'm sure the wind was blowing because
yeah, it blows
I'm
down
like,
there.
this is not for me. It's a little more wide open,
Yeah,
you know. Go back to Lincoln and buy a house.
really.
Yeah.
So how many days were you in Lincoln before you bought a house, you think?
Not more than a week.
Really?
There was some things to pick from.
Yeah. And when did Earl and Margaret buy one?
They bought one, maybe a year later or so.
Okay.
I don't think they got theirs right away.
How much did you have to pay for that first house?
25.
25,000.
Yep. It's on 2 acres.
Yeah.
A fixer-upper.
Log house, cabin, and a garage, right, or a shop.
It just had the log house and a little bitty shop.
Yeah.
And you could throw a cat through the walls of the log house. It was wide open, chinking falling off.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good fixer-upper.
So what was that first winter like in Lincoln then?
It was a very beautiful fall. It kind of reminded me of this last winter in November, only nicer. No snow. We worked on the acre lot. My brother-in-law helped me clean up the back lot, and it just needed a lot of cleanup, and they were great to have around for that. November was beautiful, and then December wasn't too bad. January 82, it snowed 100 inches in January.
Yeah.
And we had a neighbor right across from us, cool old neighbors. And they had a post about 4 feet high on the edge of their driveway, and the snow was to the top of the post.
Yeah.
But it was powder.
Right.
Very just really light. You could probably actually walk through it.
Yeah.
Just snowed and snowed.
Yeah.
We're like, where in the heck have we moved to?
Yeah. So what were you doing for work? Because you didn't have a backhoe then, right?
Eventually, the backhoe got shipped down. I had bought it from her dad. He pretty much gave me his half.
Oh.
So I had an old John Deere backhoe, and we shipped it clear down to Lincoln.
Wow, from
Yeah,
Canada.
I don't know what that cost, but
God dang.
somebody hauled it down there. It didn't take too long for the word to get out. I was burying dogs. I was doing whatever I could do, and then Earl and I was pretty mechanically inclined. We tried advertising for working on people's cars, plumbing. I did plumbing, bought a chimney sweeping setup. I was trying to do everything to survive. And eventually I met a neighbor only a block away that was wanting to retire. He was the main backhoe guy in Lincoln.
Who's that?
Ray Hagan.
Okay.
And I got pretty close to him just going over and visiting, and and he had turned stuff down, and eventually we traded our camper trailer. He had an old Jimmy V6 dump truck, single axle, and we traded our camper trailer for the dump truck.
Yeah.
And what came with it was a source of gravel.
Oh, really?
Which was huge. It was just huge to get that opportunity.
Where was that gravel pit?
It was, and you go up Beaver Creek and you cross the creek right there.
Oh, yeah, on the left.
Right on the left.
Yeah.
It was convenient. It was great gravel. The old timer that owned the ranch, it was easy to work with. And I was hauling gravel $35 a load. I'd haul like 3 o'clock in the morning to 7.
Yeah.
Trying to not get caught with the DOT.
Yeah.
And people got to where they're like, who in the heck? I wished he wouldn't slam that tailgate.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I had to pull start the old Jimmy. It was not healthy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hmm.
But it worked. It made some good income.
Yeah. So then, from that point on, you just started building your excavation business then, huh?
Yeah. Started buying a new backhoe. Like back then, that was 82, 83, $75,000 backhoes, 18.5% interest year after year after year.
Yeah.
Never could get ahead.
How many years did you go before you could not borrow money to get through the winter?
15 maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe 20.
Yeah.
Yeah, and eventually the interest got down to maybe 12 or, our house was 12.
Was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which sounded like a good deal.
Really? Yeah. And then you had my sister, so you ended up with 2 kids. You had Sarah in 83.
83.
Yeah. And basically just started building your company and your reputation from there. It's pretty wild because, by the time I graduated high school, you had what, 4 backhoes, an excavator.
I'm not sure I had 4, but we were getting up there.
You had 4.
And by this time, you and Sarah were helping in the business.
Right.
And maybe another guy or 2.
Right.
Which was great. And we were really the main dirt guy in
Yeah.
that was serious about it.
Right.
Ended up in some other gravel pits.
Right.
And then when you guys were old enough, I mean, you got your experience splitting wood.
Yeah.
You could barely get in and out of the backhoe.
Yeah. What do you remember about those years in Lincoln, like growing your business?
Just busy all the time.
Yeah.
Because we plowed snow too, and seems like I never had enough time to, actually have time with my kids. I don't recall. I compare me to you, and you just heads over heels more time spent with your kids,
Yeah, well, we spent a lot of time though, like working together and stuff.
Yeah, and that turned out to be some of my best times. Was you and Sarah?
Yeah,
working alongside me, and
right.
You could keep up with everything I was doing, and she would screen and gravel on her own, and
yeah,
landscaping and
right. So those years, because that's what I remember was like how driven you were, how hard you worked, the amount of hours you put in. Where do you think that like work ethic came from?
Having 15 brothers and sisters and a dad with a work ethic and mom.
Yeah.
And grandpa, you think about having that many siblings and the drive, and you see your brothers being successful, your sisters, and you're like, are you going to be the first slouch in the family, or are you going to just do something,
You did end up with, and, we talked about it earlier, but I mean, all 16 kids were alive until this past year, but I mean, they all ended up really pretty successful in whatever they did. I mean, nobody went out and got rich, but also nobody were like dirtbags either. I mean, they were all just like blue collar, hardworking people.
I went to my family reunion last summer, thankfully, first time, and we went in like 96 or 97.
Yeah.
That was the last time I'd made it to my family reunion, and it's amazing to me, all the nieces and nephews and the success, all of them are, it's like, how could you be any different in this family?
Right.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, there seemed to be a work ethic gene in that. I mean, because like our cousins and stuff all seem to be doing well in whatever businesses they're doing. Yeah. A lot of them are in really hard, I mean, it's hard work, farming and ranching and.
Right.
Yeah,
it's something else, because you think about nowadays, back then, 16 kids. Look at what that, that's kind of like overpopulation, big time.
Yeah.
But, when you look back on what they all do and how they've contributed to, society,
mm-hmm.
I guess it worked out really good,
Right. What do you remember about Lincoln? Because Lincoln, Montana, for people that there's 2 things Lincoln, Montana's really famous for. They kind of made the movie A River Runs Through It about like the Blackfoot River. So that Blackfoot River Valley's kind of famous and really well known for trout fishing, and it's on the edge of the Bob Marshall Wilderness, the Scapegoat Wilderness, and it's also known for the Unabomber.
There's a couple other things too. that you might not remember. It had the highest divorce rate at one point, and that might have came from Paul Harvey. And then, of course, you were kind of famous with Paul Harvey. That was one of your first hits on the radio.
Yeah. Yeah, you talked about me when I was like 14.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a beautiful valley, but what do you remember? Because that valley's changed a lot, especially with the, like with the trees. Because when I grew up, it was just so thick, like you couldn't see you couldn't see your neighbor.
That's right.
But that landscape's really changed a lot.
Excuse me. A lot of that came from back in the day when the huge pine trees, number one, became really valuable, the wood in them. Mm-hmm. So people were just basically selling them, $1,000 a piece or whatever. A lot of them went away in those times because there was trees 6 foot across. Almost in every storefront there was a massive pine tree.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was when you came in from the east, you came into this dark corridor of big pine trees, which is like a park,
Right.
And in order to get the federal money to widen the highway, they had to take a bunch of those out in the right-of-way, which was too bad,
Yeah, it used to be kind of like driving down a tunnel.
It was.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe, what it looked like 40-some years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the beetle epidemic
Right.
really didn't treat us too well either. What's that been, 15 years ago or so?
Yeah, where the beetles really killed a huge amount of the timber in that. Well, all over. I mean, even down through Colorado and Montana.
I really believe that if we had just managed the timber like we should have and thinned out the smaller trees around all the big stuff, that we'd still have a park like. Mm-hmm. And when you meet new people coming to Lincoln, they're like, this place is so beautiful.
Well, that's the thing we get. We were spoiled with the way it was before, but we're still spoiled today.
We are.
I mean, people vacation to just see that country. What year did you buy the property that you live on now?
1987. I was building the road when I found out my dad had passed.
Oh, really?
Yep, I remember that. I was working on the road.
Oh, really?
And Lisa came out. And
was that a big surprise when he passed, or had he been in pretty rough shape?
He was in rough shape. It's kind of a real long story about how my dad, he had a certain amount of debt, and he always paid it, in the early 80s. And same with my father-in-law and I think this happened throughout so many places, is he had a certain amount of debt, I'm guessing $100,000 or something, running debt all the time. And my uncles and aunts sued him for the ranch when my grandma passed. Mm-hmm. And it just destroyed him because he's the one that stayed on the ranch from the beginning and hung in there. And the will was written that it was his, Mm-hmm. My grandpa died first, my grandma passed, and it was his ranch, and they sued. Mm-hmm. And I think it cost an extra $80,000 or $100,000 in lawyers' fees. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine at 21% interest what that would do.
Right.
It kind of destroyed him. He actually lost the ranch, and my little brother ended up buying it back. Mm-hmm. But
yeah, how did Jeff end up getting it back?
He probably bought it back at somewhat of a discount from the banks. I don't know all the details, but he was able to keep it,
Did he get it back before Grandpa passed away?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't know why. That's why I'm drawing a blank on that, because it was 87. I don't know. I think it might have been before. That's something I need to find out.
Yeah. Yeah. So when he passed away, he was pretty young too, right? Malin?
67.
Yeah.
I've outlived him.
Yeah.
We're all getting there.
Well, he lived a lot rougher. I mean, he wasn't as good on his body, I guess, with alcohol and just a rough life, the war.
Yeah.
A little different time than now. So when you bought that property out there in Lincoln in 87, what'd you have to pay for that property?
I think it was around 40-some thousand.
Really? Yeah, it's amazing the difference.
It was, the whole thing would have been 80-some thousand, I think, and we kind of regretted not.
Oh, because the neighbors got half and you bought half.
Well,
right?
it was one piece.
Oh, okay.
And that was ex-Champion Timber land, and the guy I bought it from worked for Champion Timber. He was what they call a cruiser.
Yeah.
Timber sales. Anyway, I managed to talk him out of a piece in the very back end, which I thought would work for us and we could still build, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I put the road in and the power and the phone, all that, utilities.
Yeah, because when you bought that property, you had to walk in from the highway kind of through the timber, and that property was kind of to the far back. I guess, what was there, 80 acres originally, the whole thing?
Yeah.
Or 40?
I guess it was 40.
And then you ended up with about 13.
Yeah. We actually had 12 and a half. Yeah.
Okay. And then so there again, like you said, you built a little cabin up in Canada. What year did you start building the cabin I grew up in then?
Let's see, it would have been the early 90s.
Really? So yeah. you owned it a couple years before you started building the house?
Yeah.
So that cabin, you just started building that on like the nights and weekends, basically, mornings and...
I had an agreement to myself that I'd work on it until I got a call to go work.
Yeah.
And I had a little old outhouse modified into a nail shed and tools. And it wasn't an outhouse. I converted it just to a little tool shed. And anytime I had calls, I'd just take my apron off and go do my work.
Really?
And that's, that happened through a winter and a summer. I don't remember how long it took. But
I remember I was probably around 8 years old or 9, maybe 10, somewhere right in there. Probably not 10, probably more like 8, because Sarah was pretty young when you built that. But it's for people that don't know, it's a really cool cabin. It's got pretty big logs, big compared to a lot of, the smaller. They're not like little fake small logs. I mean, they're pretty good size, and but not a real big house. How many square feet is it?
It's 400 down, 600 up, so 1,000 square feet.
Yeah, and so that's what ended up being where, like, my sister and I grew up. From the time I was about 10, we moved out there. Do you remember what year we moved out there? About 88, 87? No, it would have been
92 or 93, 91 to 93, somewhere in there.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly what year. I ran across some of those things in my documents here a while back where we were doing that.
Yeah. Well, and then you started, because like I say, there was nothing on that property, but you put in a yard, and then, remember, we dug a pond when I was in high school, big fish pond. Now you've got 2 ponds, but it's kind of cool because, like, I think that's what I learned from you. Like with my property, the way it is just like, it's just like constantly working on things year after year over time. Like if you work on something long enough, it ends up being nice over time.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of I think a lot of people want things overnight, but it seems like if you just constantly are putting little bits of work in here and there consistently, it turns into something pretty nice.
Yeah, and as you get more out of debt, you can do a little bit more here and there, and
yeah,
And when I got out of the snow plowing business, it gave me really the whole winter to putter on things and make improvements. And
Right.
And that's been quite a while now.
Yeah. What do you remember about that time frame when I started making knives?
Well, I definitely remember how that all started and, how it progressed and trying to keep you, keep you happy, like when you want to be in sports and you want to do all these things. And it's like constantly, you want to do a little bit of everything, but I remember my favorite saying to you was just time management.
Yeah.
You can do it all, but you just got to really kind of manage your time, and you made it work. It's you did what you did in some sports, and maybe you sacrificed some because you had more knife time, and it just kind of amazing how it progressed into a paying hobby.
Yeah.
I'll never forget when you came home and you had your first $20 orders.
Yeah.
And you go back to school the next day and you get a few more, and I'm like, when you come home, I'm like, hey, Josh, how long is it going to take you to make that 8 knives at $20 or something?
Yeah.
I'm like, I think your price is going to be a little higher.
Yeah. Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I do kind of remember some of that. I remember a little bit after that when they were more like $60, getting way too many orders. I remember being stressed out about, like, I'll be making these knives for years at that point.
What we really enjoyed out of it is the friends you met and your knife maker friends, and they'd come to the place, and pretty soon you're having hammer-ins, and we get to hear all the stories of the trips you made. And I mean, that was a big part of our life too, is having that, you having that success,
Yeah, those knife makers became pretty good friends, the people that mentored me or that I got to hang around with for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And Rick Dunkerley, that
right
kind of started it all as the coach. Like you say, we had several times Rick would host hammer-ins, and those people would all come over to our house for a barbecue or something.
It was fun.
Yeah. You remember dragging my shop down the highway after I built
your
that
shop, or I remember dragging the storage shed down the highway.
No, remember we built my first knife shop at the high school.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Was it in the winter?
Yeah, well, we built it all winter, and then we drug it home on the highway when the highway was froze.
Okay, because I don't remember that one, but I remember the first shed I drug out there. I waited until there was a good snowpack.
Yeah,
it was the first building out there, and I hooked onto it, had good runners, and never even thought about when I got to the intersection on Highway 200, I stopped.
Oh, and you spin out?
Froze down.
Oh.
Yeah, the minute I stopped, the heat from the runners froze down, and I had to really jerk hard on it to get it going again.
Oh, really?
And I didn't stop, so
yeah.
I must, when we did yours, I must have just, it was smaller too.
Yeah.
I must have just said, when we're going to go with this, we're not going to stop.
Yeah. No, my first knife shop that was kind of separate from like the sheds or whatever that we had at the house, my senior class in construction class, we built that. I bought all the materials for it, and that was our class project. That's the shed that's out.
That's right. That's the shed you got out there by the basketball court.
Yeah.
Right. You added to it though, right?
No, we built that, and then we drug it home on the ice on the highway. And then remember I bought that old trailer house frame, and you and I loaded it on that trailer house frame. I cut that trailer house frame down. You remember that?
Yeah.
Because that's how I hauled it to Missoula.
Yeah, that was
that was sketchier than hell.
Yeah.
Some weird guy up Stemple Pass had a trailer house that had like burned down or something, or maybe it was just garbage. I don't remember, but I bought that steel frame from him, and we hauled it home, and I cut that all apart, and then you and I each used a backhoe on each side of that shed, and we lifted it up. Remember, we lifted that up, and then we backed the trailer frame under it.
We probably got some 8mm movies or videos somewhere.
Probably. Because that was in like 2001. Then I hauled it to Missoula and kind of like it was a camper, and I plugged it in at my first boss's shop in Missoula. And then I worked in that. I hauled it out to Frenchtown, and I built my first house out here and plugged it into the garage. And that was my first knife shop for several years.
It came from Lincoln right to Missoula?
Yep.
It didn't go east of the divide for a little while?
No.
I thought maybe it did, but...
No, because I lived out east of town, but I didn't ever live on the east side of the divide. It never went over there.
When you met Jody, she was living over there, right?
Yeah, but I never stayed over there or lived over there or anything. So it stayed there until we moved it to Missoula.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of wild time, I guess.
Yeah.
I was just certain that driving down the highway when I was pulling that thing to Missoula, because I bolted it to that trailer frame, and it was not, I mean, it's basically wood screws. I mean, like legs. But I was worried that the wind was going to blow that thing off that trailer. It was not the best of construction.
Windy day then when you did it, or just
the highway speed.
Yeah.
But it made it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. What else? Is there anything else you remember from either us growing up or Lincoln, or anything that I missed?
No, yeah, I think it'd be nice to cover how I didn't ever take the time to take you hunting and all that, and how that came to be. You've probably covered that before on my friends and your friends that would take you out.
Yeah, we had. I mean, we did some fishing and a little bit of bird hunting when I was young. I remember going fishing a little bit. I remember you'd take me up Beaver Creek and we'd go fishing. Those were some of my favorite memories. I remember like puddle hopping. I remember thinking Beaver Creek was big. I look at it now, it's just like little. But I remember catching brook trout out of Beaver Creek. I remember we went over and did maybe a little bird hunting on the east side of the divide somewhere a couple times. But yeah, like Earl, my uncle that had moved down there with you, he was really the one that took me as a little kid just out deer hunting.
You had really ethical training, hunters with ethics. I had kind of a bad experience when I moved to Lincoln. I went out hunting with some guys that probably told you that. And
yeah.
They weren't the right guys. I knew no one. And and
Bruce West was the one that really got me into archery hunting when I was like probably 14, 15, probably 14 or so. I remember, somewhere right in there. Bruce West was, he would always pick me up and take me archery hunting. And then Earl, he's who I got my first elk with. Earl took me rifle hunting.
He's really like a brother to me even now.
Yeah.
And then Jerry Barish, didn't he help?
Well, Jerry took me once.
Yeah.
Once or twice maybe went with Jerry, and then and then I didn't really go with Carl, but we would shoot bows together. Carl Templeton worked for you.
Yep.
But Carl was a really, really good bow hunter. But I remember he was the one that I'd sit and shoot bows with, and he would give me some tips on, because my bow back then was terrible. I bought that, compared to now, but I bought that from Chauncey Albros.
Albro. Is that still the one hanging in your old knife shop? Or is it something different?
I don't have that one. I don't know what happened.
There's one in there.
That's the one I bought in the year 2004. It looks like it's ancient, but I guess it is 20 years old.
Yeah.
But the one that I was 14 years old with was, I can only imagine how terrible it was. Because I remember when I would shoot even at 40 yards, it felt like I was shooting a mile. They were all aluminum arrows, so they'd bend really easy. And I don't remember, I do remember getting tree stands from garage sales. And I told you a while back, I have no idea how I survived that. Because nobody helped me.
We don't either. I mean,
nobody helped me put those up. I'd go sit in the tree, and I have no idea how they stayed in the tree. I didn't belt in. Well, I took nails out of your nail shed to put them in the trees to go up the tree.
And we had a period of time there where the mountain lions were spotted in town. We look back on that and wonder why you didn't ever.
Well, that was the scariest, was the the one time I had that mountain lion follow me. I didn't realize it followed me into my stand. I didn't see its tracks until I walked out, but yeah, we had a lot of but the tree stand thing, like that was the most sketchiest piece of shit tree stand you could ever have. Somebody had homemade it, and I bought it, I think. Yeah, and then Mom would haul me around with the lawn mowing business. I remember that. But what
you were good in sales too. Like if you were helping out, like selling cookies or anything like that, I guess people just pull their checkbook or wallet out when they see you coming.
Yeah, I forgot about all that. Yeah, selling stuff. What if you had, there'll be great grandkids or somebody listening to this someday. What would be either advice for them or something that you would want them to know about you?
Well, this is kind of a team effort between both your mom and I, but we feel like our period of time on this old earth has been a lot of change in politics and everything. Mm-hmm. And I can only hope that future generations can experience what we had the opportunity to live through. Mm-hmm. Right now it's a bad time to ask me that question because I feel like World War III is just almost right there.
Right.
It's crazy. Mm-hmm. People got to learn to live together. I mean,
right.
Somehow.
Yeah.
We're working on that.
Yeah.
It causes a lot of stress between your mom and I.
Yeah.
And it gets more so every week. But we can only hope, even for our grandkids. I can't imagine great grandkids and what their future might be. I get a kick out of watching what happened in this last cold spell with electric cars. I just love the fact that there's so much bullshit.
Yeah.
That we're going to learn to conserve what works good, for future generations.
Right. Right.
And I think we jump in a damn Volkswagen Beetle just because we're putting more oil back in the ground for your kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you personally, though? Is there anything that we missed or anything you would want your kids to know about you or great grandkids or your life growing up or anything?
I don't know if there's anything more they need to know about me. Hopefully if they actually take the time to read, everything's documented in every day I work. It's written down in a book.
Yeah. What made you, when did you start documenting stuff?
Well, it's so interesting because it goes clear back to like a little ledger sheet. It's so fun to look at almost the first and second year of what we are doing every day. I could spend winter after winter looking at that stuff, Yeah,
it's the one thing I probably regret the most or that you should have made me do was document like stories or diary. I really should start it now. But that's one thing you've always been really good about is you write down every day, like what you did or,
But you might not be able to read it. I had horrible handwriting. Sometimes it's better. It just seems like I got in trouble too much in school and had to write, "I will not talk in class." Can you imagine that coming from your dad?
Yeah.
What went haywire in my brain back in those days?
You're not a big talker.
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm sort of a doer. I want to live as an example.
Yeah.
To the end, right? To the end.
Right. Well, you've done that well, that's for sure.
And you're doing the same, and your kids are, it comes out in the kids.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they're good kids. Well, thanks for coming on here.
Yeah.
It was fun.
It was fun.
I was worried that you wouldn't talk because you're not a big talker.
Well, I feel like recall for me sometimes on what I should know, and it's such a bummer that our sister Kathy was our rock.
Yeah.
And she could answer every one of these questions in detail.
Right.
About my family in the past.
Right.
But if you think about, how hard we had to work and focus on what we're doing and taking time, and it should have gone to more reunions.
Mm-hmm.
I damn near had a heart attack over even going to the reunion last year, because having 15 brothers and sisters, the pressure that you're going to be the only one, Mark, that doesn't make it.
Right.
And that's amazing. I had never experienced the pressure like that. But for some reason, if there would have been a doctor in Lincoln, I think they would have said, you better keep your butt at home the day before. But there was no one in the office, so I actually made the call to, and I just went. And 3 weeks later, my favorite sister's gone.
Right.
But we had an awesome visit.
Yeah.
So I should have done more reunions, should have been home more to learn more about my past and my family's past.
Yeah, well, it's hard when you're 1,000 miles away and you're also trying to build your life. I mean, you got debt and kids and interest rates, and it's just life. I mean, everybody should have, could have, would have done something, but also it's hard to, I think some people just naturally have better memories of the past. Like I can't remember so much of, like, even when my kids were young, and I'm only 42.
Yeah.
So it's weird how I think some people just have naturally better memories. It's interesting. Everybody's different. So I don't really look at it as you just live life, Yeah. Nobody does it perfectly.
Well, that's what's fun about going back now in what I wrote down every day, because I think I sent you a couple things that just completely spaced out.
Yeah.
And my goal is to eventually go through all that, and you can just take a simple picture of one sentence, like, I don't remember that.
Right. Well, that's where I think that would be the piece of advice I would give to anybody if they were young, and I really should start living it now, because even at 42, if you do it for the next 30 years, it's going to mean something to somebody. But you don't have to remember it if you write it down.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, having a diary, a journal of just what you did every day is, like you say, even a few lines is.
I don't do that all winter now. It's kind of unfortunate, but it was more related to my work, except when we were building cabin or whatever, sometimes I made comments.
Right. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Well, cool. Well, thanks for coming on. It was fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Proud of you.
Thanks.